What's crackin', my creepy comrades? Sugar Pants back from the basement with another awful offering. 1986's Deadtime Stories, also known as The Greebles and Freaky Fairy Tales. A terrible triple treat about an uncle who just wants his bratty nephew to go to bed, so he tells him story after story after story to bore him to death. For the most part, it's kind of a modern telling of classic fairy tales with a dash of 80s excess. So what does this contemporary chronicle have in store for us? Let's check that sleaze docket and find out. We have 14 dead bodies, 12 cups blood, 4 naked breasts, 1 naked butt, sexy synth music, fleshy tentacle resurrection, borderline actual bestiality, telekinetic dirt face, unnecessary mental health jokes, knife to the skull, eyeball throwing, heartectomy, facial heart attack, 1 flaming handectomy, 1 reanimated heart, 1 throat slashing, 1 throat stabbing, 1 implied car smushing, 1 fence post impalement, 1 car door shut on leg, 1 house shaking orgasm, and Smurf brand chewable vitamins. Our trio of tales begins with the wraparound story. Uncle Mike is babysitting little Brian who won't go to bed. He tells Mike there's a monster that's gonna get him, but as long as he gets a story, he'll go to sleep. Mike rattles off a dozen story titles, but none of them seem interesting, so Brian says, just make something up. That's when we roll the opening credits via antique book and rubber monster gloves with cheesy ballad rock.
It's no wonder why I turned out like I did, remembering my bedtime tales as a kid.
Begin the first story proper. A boy named Peter who's sold in slavery to a pair of witches. Jesus, Uncle Jack's first attempt at making up a story begins with indentured servitude? Hannibal and Florinda are working on some evil magic. Hannibal tells Jack to go into town and tell the lecherous priest there are pretty ladies waiting for him. Well, that old hag really should brush her top teeth as hard as she does the bottom ones. Skip ahead a bit and the priest is getting drunk and ready for some hot medieval wench action. And he makes it to the witch's hut, which really cleans up well. The two chain the horny old goat to the bed and start undressing. Unfortunately, we don't get to see the fantasy version. Our first naked breast of the film belongs to Florinda. I suppose I've seen worse. Hannibal rubs some red potion onto the priest's wrist, which burns his flesh, and his hand crawls away. Florinda bashes the priest over the head, and they get on with their work.
Brain of a black cat, heart of an eel, grind them together until they congeal.
Oh, they're making McDonald's Big Mac sauce. Apparently, the whole point of the spell is to locate the burial plot of their dead sister, Magoga. The detached hand points the way through the cemetery, and they start digging until they find a chained doorway. Oh, great, we switched over to Hocus Pocus, have we? The door leads to a deep catacomb that looks like it hasn't been disturbed in quite a while. Eventually, the hags find their sister's skeleton and fish out her desiccated heart. While lugging the body back to the witch's den, Jack asks why they waited so long to dig up their sister, and apparently the resurrection spell can only be cast when the full moon falls on the solstice, and it's a Friday, which happens apparently every 37 years. Of course, they could have dug up the body and held on to it until the next time they could perform the resurrection spell and not do it all at the same time, but whatever. Looking over the spell book, Hannibal sees they need a girl. Florinda gives Jack a bath and takes him out to find a damsel. And as luck would have it, a pretty young thing is fetching water from the well. Jack makes awkward small talk with Miranda, who eventually falls for his bullshit, which allows Florinda to chloroform her. Back at the hut, Hannibal chastises the two for taking too long, as it's almost time for the ritual. They strap Miranda to a rack, and Jack asks to be the one to use the knife. Florinda thinks it's a good idea, but Hannibal says it's too important for any mistakes. But Florinda gives him the knife anyway. Jack tells Miranda to stay calm and follow his lead. Oh, sure, she has a lot of reasons to trust him, doesn't she? Hanegal pours some liquid over Magaga's heart, and it begins to come to life. She places the organ into the skeleton's ribcage, and fleshy tentacles begin to cover the body. And the special effects are actually pretty decent. Nice and gross and well lit. Eventually, the bloody heap begins to stir, and a mostly formed body begins to emerge from its husk. The time has come for Jack to kill Miranda, but instead throws the knife into Hanegal's head. She falls dead onto Magaga, who begins to lap up the blood. Florinda angrily tries to kill Jack, but Miranda bashes her skull in, and the two make a break for it. They find a cloaked person on the path.
Excuse me, sir, but could you please tell us how to get out of here?
Did you just assume my gender? It's Magaga, fully resurrected, but Jack easily rips her heart out and she falls to the ground as dry bones. The heart attacks Jack's face, but Miranda smashes it against the wall. And we get a lovely romantic end for the two young lovers. Aw, you got me involved in a witch's coven that tried to sacrifice me and I almost died twice. Of course we're gonna fuck in the woods. But remember, this is a story being told to a kid.
Ew, that's a mushy, icky ending.
I don't want to say The Princess Bride borrowed that bit, but this movie was released first. So since the original ending didn't please Brian, we get the alternate ending.
Just then, Magoga jumped back to life and... Better?
Much.
Which I thought was kind of a cute little addition. Uncle Mike closes the door and goes back downstairs, but Brian almost immediately calls out for him again to tell him a monster's gonna get him.
Brian, for Christ's sakes, the Miss Nude Bayonne competition is on Cablevision right now.
Remember, folks, an adult couple made the decision to leave this creep in charge of their child. So Brian makes a story request, Little Red Riding Hood.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Rachel. Actually, she wasn't all that little. She was a hot-looking high school senior with clear blue eyes and fine, firm breasts.
That's not the way Mommy tells it.
Boy, the things you could get away with in the 80s, huh? Story number 2. We join Rachel in her bedroom, undressing in front of the mirror and having a nice little sexy fantasy. Remember, this is a story being told to an 8-year-old. You fucking perverts. Eventually, a fantasy man joins Rachel in the mirror, and the two bump and grind to the awful synth sex music. But before anything good can happen, Rachel is snapped back to reality and notices the dog licking her thigh. Her mom says she needs to run an errand for her grandmother. On the other side of town, we're introduced to Willie, who's stopping by the pharmacy. He hands a joint to the pharmacist, who's selling him some tranquilizers. But all I can focus on is the Smurf brand chewable vitamins, complete with collectible Smurf head bottle cap topper. I always wanted one of those as a kid, but we were a Flintstones vitamin family. Just then, Rachel stops in, and Willie starts putting the moves on her. She's picking up her grandmother's medicine and skips out the door. Willie gets his drugs and leaves as well. Rachel's jogging her way to Grandma's house, but meets up with her boyfriend along the way. He starts getting handsy with her at the park, and she says,
"Not here."
And he suggests another location. Back at Willie's place, he's prepping his drug paraphernalia when he realizes the pharmacist mixed up the orders and he got Grandma's Maalox instead. He rushes back to the pharmacist and demands her address.
Listen to me, you shit. If I'm not out cold by moonrise tonight...
Ooh, clunky foreshadowing is clunky. Rachel and her boyfriend make their way to the maintenance shed at the country club. Lady, your boyfriend has a backpack with candles, an air mattress, and a tire iron. At what point are you going to pay attention to the gigantic red flags waving in your face? Willie heads off to Grandma's house and knocks on the door. He asks if Rachel is there, and she says,
No.
and slams the door in his face. He tries a couple of times to get in the house, but not once does he say something simple like, the pharmacy mixed up our medicines, and I need mine right away. Instead, he bangs on the door like a lunatic until Granny grabs the biggest knife she owns. Since he can't get in, he sits out front and starts scratching like he needs his fix or something. Rachel's boyfriend finally gets the air mattress inflated, and the two start getting busy. Hey, remember, this is a story being told to an 8-year-old. You fucking perverts. And we get more horrible synth sex music. And in an attempt to be artistic or whatever, the sex scene is intercut with Willie, who's not having a great evening. He starts ripping off his clothes and growing fangs. Oh, he's a werewolf. I suppose that's a clever angle to the story. After the deed, Rachel and her boyfriend hear a noise outside, but it's just the groundskeeper, or whatever. Definitely not a werewolf. Rachel takes off for Grandma's house where Granny is polishing her silver. She hears a noise outside and goes out to see that something's knocked over the trash. Growling comes from the trees, so she runs back inside. Something starts banging on the door, and that's when she realizes she didn't lock the back door. Suddenly, a furry claw reaches in. Granny runs to the front door and is attacked by the werewolf. Rachel makes her way inside and sees blood on the floor and other signs of a struggle. She finds her grandma bleeding on the floor. Outside, Rachel's boyfriend is smoking a cigarette and gets his throat slashed. Instantly, the werewolf is inside and attacks Rachel, but he's not so interested in killing her right away. She slaps him in the face with a cactus, and he tackles her in the living room. That's when she notices Grandma's silver pie server and stabs the werewolf in the throat. He falls to the ground in human form. Rachel then sees that Grandma is still alive and she's rushed to the hospital. Rachel's sitting bedside as Grandma starts waking up. Suddenly, Grandma starts growing fangs and...
Grandma, what big teeth you have!
And as Uncle Mike finishes the story, he notices Brian fast asleep and slips out the door. But he barely gets a few steps away before Brian starts calling out for him and crying out, "Monster!" And at this point, Mike has had enough.
There is no monster in here. There's no monster in here. Nothing here, nothing here. Definite deficit of monsters in here, isn't there? No monster here. Nothing in here. Okay. So you see there's no monster in this room, right?
Yeah, except the really loud jerk angrily screaming at the kid and throwing toys around. Oh, it's a social commentary all of a sudden. Brian begs for one last story, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and Mike reluctantly tells the story. But hold on to your hats, folks, because this is where the movie flies right off the rails into Bonkersville. Our story starts off at the Home for the Hopelessly Insane. A security guard stops a pair of patients from escaping, Papa Bear and Baby Bear. They narrowly avoid being hit by a car being driven by Mama Bear. She picks the two up and hauls ass, knocking the guard out of the way. Mama throws the car in reverse and runs the poor bastard over.
Only grazed him the first time.
Suddenly, the soundtrack sounds more like the Dr. Demento show.
Life these days can be a mess. Daily decisions lead to stress. Are you dreading what each brand new day might bring? Ah, there are voices in your head. Do you dive beneath the bed every time the phone begins to ring?
The three are driving to a house they think is abandoned, but we find out Goldilocks is there talking to a boy on the lawn about not being ready to make a certain kind of commitment. That's when we see the boy has been impaled with a fence post, and Goldie is fucking telekinetic! She brings the boy inside, and we find out she's killed quite a few individuals in a variety of ways. She catches the All Exposition channel just in time to hear about the escape from the mental institution. Apparently, Papa and Baby are serving a combined sentence of 4,726 years for their crimes, which makes me wonder why they were wandering around an unfenced yard with one inept security guard. But we also hear that Goldie is believed to be responsible for at least 14 murders herself, including her own parents. Meanwhile, the Bear family is knocking off a bank for some quick cash, and we get more of the ridiculous soundtrack. Goldie is still watching the news as they interview the police force led by Lieutenant Jack B. Nimble and Captain Jack B. Quick. The two are leading the search for the Bears and Miss Locks. Apparently that's enough for Goldie, who decides it's time to go upstairs and take a shower. Just then the Bear family shows up and realizes someone's in their house.
Someone's sleeping in my bed.
Someone's sleeping in my bed.
Somebody's sleeping in my...
What the fuck has happened to this movie? Papa confronts Goldie in the shower and Mama's got a fucking toy stormtrooper blaster. They take a moment to decide whether they waste her or invite her to join their crew. Ultimately, they go with the latter. Outside, Baby sees Goldie sitting in the sun and starts stroking his mop. Goldie's sawing up some body parts for burial, and Baby brings her some flowers. The two have about the depth of a conversation you'd expect, until Baby decides to go all Pepe Le Pew. Goldie then smashes Baby into the ground with a nearby tree.
Wow! What a woman!
But just like the old cartoons, Baby isn't so easily discouraged and continues his violently aggressive love. Eventually, Goldie starts liking it, leading to a very confusing psychic orgasm. Goldie rolls off and apologizes to the stack of dead men who apparently tried to do the same, but wasn't quite as thick-skulled as Baby was. The family's sitting down to dinner. Porridge. But it's too hot. Goldie suggests taking a walk until it cools, but Papa says they're going out for pizza. Just then the police roll up with every available armed officer and surround the property. While at the restaurant, Papa looks at their prospects and suggests they hightail it to California. Back at the Bear house, one idiot sneezes, resulting in a hail of gunfire into the house. One bullet strikes a stack of dynamite, causing it to explode. The news media, having no actual confirmed details, just goes ahead and announces the whole family's been wiped out. The family catches the report at the restaurant as they're being rung up, and Goldie force chokes the waitress to death before they can pay the tab.
12 state police wounded.
My treat.
And they all lived happily ever after.
Uncle Mike finally turns out the lights, but before he shuts the door, Brian calls out one last time.
Thank you.
Aww, well isn't he a sweet little kid after all? Just then, Brian looks up above his bed and I'm not sure what the hell he sees.
Nah.
Oh, I get it. The wraparound story was The Boy Who Cried Wolf. The end. Jesus, what a flick. I don't know if it was intentional, but the tone of the story seemed to follow Uncle Mike's mental state. Starts off kind of tame, moves to strangely horny and annoyed, and ends up with just out of his mind over his nephew's constant demands for stories. Honestly, it's not the worst horror anthology I've seen, but definitely far from the best. I think the biggest issue is the overall tone is just all over the place. Some parts are straight horror, others horror comedy, and still others are just batshit crazy. I know anthologies have a bit more wiggle room than others, but I feel like this one would have been better if they had been just a little less all over the highway. Usually here I go on about the cast and crew a bit, but this one's a little sparse. Melissa Leo played Mama Bear, but she managed to do a couple episodes of BoJack Horseman as Diane's mother.
For 5 years she didn't come home. Why don't you make like A-Rod and blow?
Our tranquilized werewolf was played by Matt Mittler, who has been in a few projects: Spring Break, The Mutilator, Basket Case 2, but he was also in Breeders, and I've already mentioned how that one held on to my title of worst movie I've ever seen for a long time. And Scott Valentine, who played Peter in the first story, you might know better as Nick, Mallory's Sylvester Stallone wannabe boyfriend on Family Ties. But he also voiced the 24th Phantom in Phantom 2040 and played Detective Rafferty in 22 episodes of Black Scorpion. Well, with that dip into the dingbat pool, it's time for me to step aside and get ready for the next slimy slice. So until I see you for that one, this is your old pal Sugar Pants. See you in your dreams.
Can I have a drink, Papa?
Sure, why not?
I'll have a double bourbon and whiskey, please. I'll have a you.